Agent in Berlin by Alex Gerlis. The Wolfpack Series, Book 1. Read by Duncan, Galloway. The Wolf. The wolf is an unusual creature, feared and revered at the same time. Many cultures worship the wolf, seeing it as a benevolent animal bringing good fortune. Some Native American tribes believe the earth to have been created by wolves. Italians cherish the wolf for rescuing Romulus and Remus. In other cultures, the wolf has a more malevolent reputation, feared as a hunter. In medieval times, some Christian cultures saw the wolf as the incarnation of evil. In fairy tales, it is resolutely cast as the big, bad wolf. Norse mythology recognized this paradoxical view of the animal, with tales of the wolf chasing both the sun and the moon. The wolf is a highly social animal, living in packs, which can number in double figures. But the wolf can also operate as a solitary creature, the lone wolf, existing outside the comfort of the pack. Wolf packs operate within their own territory and commonly travel up to 50 miles a day. The wolf would make a perfect spy. Prologue. Pearl Harbor, Honolulu, December 1941. Tom Miller had never had much time for religion. Thankfully, his parents hadn't been too bothered by it either, and the fact they'd both died by the time he was 20 only confirmed his skepticism about matters of faith. Insofar as this young naval officer led his life by any credo, it was that you should treat other people as you'd like to be treated yourself. And that first weekend in December was a good case in point. The Pacific Fleet had been on high alert for the past couple of weeks at its base in Hawaii, meaning all overnight shore leave had been cancelled. But that Saturday night it was agreed a dozen junior officers from the USS Arizona could have shore leave, and Lieutenant Tom Miller was one of the lucky ones when lots were drawn. One of the unlucky ones was his best friend, Mark Bianchi. The two shared a cramped cabin and were the same age and rank, and both from Philadelphia. Mark was devastated at not having been selected for shore leave. He'd recently met a young nurse called Lucy from the Naval Hospital, and Lucy had managed to arrange for them to have the use of a friend's apartment at Aiea Bay that weekend. Tom decided that if he were in Mark's position, he'd like someone to do the right thing by him, and as nurses came in groups, Lucy was bound to have friends. So he gave his shore leave to an unspeakably grateful Mark Bianchi, who promised him he'd return the favour one day, and said his priority that weekend, which Tom somehow doubted, was to quiz Lucy on her friends and find one suitable for Tom. Lieutenant Tom Miller's watch wasn't due to start until 9 on the Sunday morning, so he allowed himself longer in his bunk. Even at anchor, a large battleship was a cacophony of sounds, a consequence of putting 30,000 tons of metal and 1,500 men on the water. It took Tom Miller a few moments to work out what it was that woke him at 5 to 8 that Sunday morning. The first sound he heard was shouting in the corridor, followed by doors slamming and the wail of the ship's air raid alarm, and he knew he had to get to the bridge as soon as possible. There was panic in the narrow passageways. People hurried in different directions, pushing others against the bulkheads. Shouts that this was no drill. Tom Miller made it to the bridge just in time to spot the first wave of a dozen Japanese torpedo bombers swooping in low from the north. He saw guns open fire on the USS Nevada on their stern, and the USS Vestal moored next to them took a direct hit. Then came the first explosion, and his reaction was to notice how everything appeared almost festive, the crackling sounds and the sight of multicolored explosions. For a moment, Lieutenant Tom Miller was too shocked to move. Then someone shouted at him to head to the bow where a fire was raging. He dropped down a ladder and hit the deck as another torpedo struck the front of the ship. He came to a few seconds later and glanced at his wristwatch, which told him it was 8 minutes past 8, and he thought of his father, whose wristwatch this had been, and somehow that gave him the strength to get to his feet. He staggered along for a few yards, still thinking of his father, feeling his firm hand guiding him by the elbow. Lieutenant Tom Miller's final moments soon followed. A blinding light and a volley of deafening sounds, followed by lasting darkness and a perpetual silence. 40 minutes after Lieutenant Tom Miller's death, the second wave of Japanese aircraft attacked. Within a quarter of an hour they'd gone, and the attack on Pearl Harbor was over, leaving much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet destroyed and more than 2,000 Americans dead. Chaos and confusion hung over the island, along with the long plumes of black smoke and the acrid smell of destruction. From his office on North Road, overlooking Quarry Loch, Lieutenant Commander Sam Stein had watched in utter shock as the attack unfolded. He'd fled to the bomb shelter at first, and then decided he was deserting his post, so climbed the stairs back to his office on the top floor. The windows had all been blown out, and he scanned the sky and then the harbour with his binoculars, doing his best to hold his shaking hands steady, pausing to make notes and wondering whether he should type them up or telephone San Diego. The end of the raid was marked by a minute or so of a strange silence, a brief pause between the aircraft departing and the onset of sirens and screams. Still in a state of shock, Sam Stein shuffled over to his desk, cleared the debris, and, because he couldn't think what else to do, began to write a report. The sky thick with Japanese warplanes, the surface of the harbour covered in wreckage, the sound of footsteps on broken glass caused him to look up. It was Robert Clark, Robert V. Clark, Jr., indeed, another lieutenant commander he knew from meetings at Fleet Headquarters. Clark worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence and had a superior air about him and a faux English accent, along with a habit of treating anyone not of superior rank with disdain. "The road's blocked and I can't get near Kuahua. Give me a telephone, Stein." He seemed surprisingly calm and pronounced Stein as Stein, and then allowed himself a pause and the trace of a smile. "You can find one that works for sure. They're all down." Robert V. Clark, Jr. sniffed as if trying to work out what the smell was. He walked around the room, trying all the phones in turn before slamming them down and muttering, "Jesus Christ!" looking at Sam Stein as if this were his fault. "They've destroyed the fleet," said Stein. "From here I've seen the Nevada, Arizona, West Virginia, and Oklahoma, all badly hit. There must have been, 200 Japanese planes in each wave?" Clark shrugged and lit a cigarette without offering one to Sam Stein. "Shouldn't we have known about it, Robert? Surely we must have had some idea, some kind of warning. An attack that size? It doesn't just come out of thin air." For the first time, Lieutenant Commander Robert V. Clark, Jr. of the Office of Naval Intelligence looked his fellow officer in the eye and without the condescending manner. "Oh, we knew all right. We certainly bloody well knew." Chapter 1. England and Berlin, May 1935. "Who do you think will win?" "I beg your pardon?" The wind whistled round the racecourse, and Barney Allen hadn't quite caught what the man alongside him had said. He was considerably shorter than Allen, and his accent certainly wasn't English. There was something distinctly continental about it. "I asked, who you think will win the Chester Cup?" There it was again, the accent, the TH in think, sounding not quite right, and win sounding more like vin. Cup sounded a bit like cap. The man looked up at Barney Allen, his eyebrows raised expectantly. "I hope you don't think I'm being impolite, but I'm afraid my job precludes me from being involved in betting or giving my opinion on horses." Allen was doing his best not to sound too pompous, but was aware he came across as more patrician than he intended. The man nodded his head slowly, apparently impressed that someone could have a job that was so important they could be at a racecourse yet not discuss the big race of the day. After all, the Chester Cup was the most important race held at the course all year. "And what job would that
Sample complete. Ready to continue?